Kia ora, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television from a very, very, very Auckland perspective. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight on a revolving panel of bloggers and Auckland opinion shapers, here's a lifelong member of the Socialist Council of Ents, blogger, author and part-time folk singer, Chris Trotter. And his critics refer to him as the architect of the Death Star, NBR political columnist and moral shepherd of the right, Matthew Hooton. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1, week 4 of the 4-week election. Who were the winners and who were the losers? Issue 2, if the right wing win, what can we expect? Issue 3, if the left wing win, what can we expect? And we'll end the show on a final word, but let's kick things off with issue 1. So, the fourth and final week of the election saw teapot tape court cases, worm riding Phil Goff and Winston on the rise. Chris, has Phil Goff done enough to keep the Labour Party vote above 30%?
Oh, with a bit of luck, he'll hold it either just under or on 30%.
Yep.
That's not good enough. Labour was planning for 36% on election day, so they would need to be pretty close to that now. One would hope.
Right.
And I don't think they're very close to that at all.
If they get under 30%, does that mean Goff's leadership?
Be very interesting to see what happens immediately after the election in relation to Phil Goff. I think the party itself, that's the rank and file members of the party as opposed to the caucus, will probably think that he's done a pretty good job.
Right.
And he has,
Yep.
to be honest.
Yep.
Within his limitations, and they are fairly substantial. But he has risen to the occasion, almost single-handed, and he's run a good campaign within the limitations of both himself as a politician and of the times,
But
which are very curious times, it seems to me.
But within the caucus, surely the knives are being sharpened.
Well, yes, but they've got to be careful that they're not seen to be some sort of headhunter, and that probably means waiting until February.
Right. Okay, so it's going to
because
be a summer of barbecues?
There's always a leadership opportunity in February for the caucus. That's probably when the move will be made. People will be positioning themselves.
The new blood rumour is Grant Robinson with Jacinda Ardern as the deputy. Too young, too soon?
Much too young, much too soon.
Yep.
That's the Mallard option, isn't it? That's the one.
Yeah. Matthew, where was the hilariously confident John Show Me the Money Key from the press debates in the fourth week? He was flat and rattled in both debates this week.
Yeah, he did better in the second one, in the TVNZ one, in the TV3 one. I think, as you've talked about, he didn't have an audience. It was a sterile environment, and he doesn't do well. He feeds on people. He feeds on that attention. He enjoys
and feeds on people.
So
John Key eats babies. I can see the headlines.
So
now.
but look, he held his own. Obviously, Phil Goff did as well as you would have thought Phil Goff should have done, and as well as Phil Goff should have been doing over the last 3 years for a former, trade minister, former defence minister, former foreign minister. Finally, we saw the competent Phil Goff that many of us, thought we would have seen for 3 years. But in the end, I think that most of the people who look at those debates closely are decided voters. I don't believe that undecided voters tune into those things and think, I know I'll watch this political debate tonight to see who to vote for me. Maybe some do, but undecided voters are by definition people who aren't interested in politics and public policy.
That's right. And the thing to say about debates is that most people don't watch them, which means that most people rely upon the commentators to tell them who won and who lost. And one of the interesting things about this election, with one or two notable exceptions, is that almost regardless
of what happens,
it's always a victory for John Key.
They love him, the media. They absolutely
well,
love him.
some elements in the media certainly do. And, it beggars belief sometimes to see how on earth they could arrive at that conclusion.
Paul Henry's conclusion at the end of TV3
well, that was the most egregious, I think.
Yes.
And people just took in a gulp of air because it was so incredibly.
But look, what we learned
partisan.
from the teapot nonsense, and what John Key understood through his polling and his own intuition,
is they hate the media.
Is that people like him more than the media. So when
Which
the
isn't
media,
difficult.
So when the media says, "Oh, John Key lost to Phil Goff," there's a whole lot of people that will think, "No, that won't be right."
That's right.
And this is the problem Labor has
Chris,
got.
was it the real impact of the worm that it reminded viewers that despite Key's personal charms, he's fronting policy that is deeply unpopular?
Well, I must confess to having a great deal of circumspection when it comes to the worm. I'm not quite sure what it measures. Certainly it...
well, every time John Key opened his mouth, it seemed to go dive.
Yes, I think what it measures probably is what people believe they ought to believe. So if someone starts talking about motherhood and apple pie, they flick it all the way up to positive. And if someone starts talking about the global recession, or Winston Peters, they wind it right down to the bottom.
You don't think John Campbell's point that if you're an undecided voter at this stage, up against the most popular Prime Minister ever, you're actually immune to his charms? You're not looking to National as the voter?
Well, it's a nice theory.
Matthew,
one doesn't, however, persist with poll ratings above 50% by being unpopular.
Key kept suggesting this week that this election will be closer than many are predicting. When he has polled over 50% most of the 3 years in office, will voters share his concerns? Because they don't seem to be listening in Ohio and Epsom.
Well, it's the big risk for National that some of its voters, if it's a sunny day, will decide to go to the beach rather than voting. Who knows? And National, as you say, has polled above 50%. I think, and you think, that overstates National support, and I think that's the point that any Prime Minister on 50% of the vote, he's going to want to get his vote out.
Yep.
So it's in his interest to position the election as closer than it's been reported in most of the media. But it also is closer than the way it's been reported. Labor 30, Greens 15, Mana 2. It's not impossible.
No.
If the polls are only slightly out for Key to lose the election, and he knows that because we know what he does with his time. He reads the poll results on his BlackBerry.
Question to both of you. In 2008, National polled 50% in the last week and ended up on 45%. Have National done enough to pacify the electorate and gain on their 2008 highs?
Look, for 3 years, I think it's probably since about January 2009, this government has been unable to do any wrong in the eyes of the electorate. And that mood seems to have endured throughout the 4 weeks of the election campaign. Phil Goff isn't the sort of politician to be able to deliver a message to break that kind of spell.
Yeah.
You would have needed a Kirk, you would have needed a Barack Obama, I think, to cast a spell strong enough to break the public's infatuation with John Key. The whole teapot tape saga merely reinforced the vast majority of New Zealanders' attachment to this man.
And John Key got to be the victim.
Yes,
Of
he
a
did.
dishonest attempt to tape him, as he's portrayed it.
That's right.
So
I am frankly astounded that National didn't take a bigger hit. It doesn't seem to have taken any hit at all. In fact,
so those landline polls are either very accurate or they're way off.
Well, look, on Saturday night, very soon, not only will there be a test between National, Labour and the other political parties, but there will be a test of the polls.
Yes, very much
and
so.
Finally, we will get to know for sure whether the randomly selected landline polls are capable of giving us a more or less accurate prediction or not.
Thank you, panel. Moving on to issue 2. So what happens if the right wing, consisting of National plus ACT plus United Future plus the Māori Party, win? Chris, almost 80% of the country are against asset sales. Will John Key take this win as a mandate to advance ACC privatisation, asset privatisation and sweatshop youth wages?
Yes, he most certainly will, and he'll be able to claim a mandate. I mean, John Key took a risk, as currency traders do. He made the sale of state assets part of his policy several months out. It doesn't matter what the polls say in relation to state assets. If a political party makes it a central feature of their manifesto and are elected, possibly by more than 50% of the electorate, then there is absolutely no grounds for saying them nay.
The critics can't really go anywhere, can they?
No, because they will have a mandate. They have told us they're going to reintroduce youth rates. They've told us they're going to partially privatise the assets. They've told us many things.
Yeah.
And once they're in government,
They've got the power to endorse it, haven't they?
They will keep their promises.
That's right,
yes.
that's right. Matthew, under National's first term in government, we have seen the largest erosion of civil liberties rush through Parliament in peacetime. The ending of jury
You
trials.
heard of the Watersiders strike?
For the ending of jury trials for anything punishable by 3 months. Vast retrospective spying powers by the police with no checks and balances when awarding search warrants. The ability to take DNA on mere suspicion next month. And expanding who can spy on New Zealanders to all government departments, including the Pork Board. How much further towards a de facto police state can the right wing drag the country?
Well, there's no answer to that. It's all nonsense.
So you don't think any of those are an erosion of civil liberties?
Oh,
The ability to take DNA on mere suspicion.
The law is being updated because of technological change. And these things were debated in Parliament and passed by Parliament.
Well, they weren't really
which is
debated,
democratically
were they?
elected. The thing on the retrospective videoing is the one that I think is deeply unfortunate. But the government itself said it was deeply unfortunate. Chris Finlayson, the Attorney General. I mean, for goodness sake.
Just pause for a moment and look back at our history. The last time a government got more than 50% of the vote was in the aftermath of the waterfront lockout.
That's right.
In the years after the waterfront lockout, a National-dominated Parliament passed many quite restrictive laws. It was illegal, for example, to use the word scab.
That's
that
right.
Was a
Yep.
direct.
Yep.
That was a direct consequence of the struggle in 1951. Well, it's no longer illegal to use the word scab. I mean, governments come, governments go. This is a government that has, strengthened the powers of the state to a considerable degree. But when national parks were threatened, 50,000 people put their feet on the street. Barely 500.
And the most popular Prime Minister in New Zealand's history immediately didn't use it.
That's right.
So it's not characteristic of a police state.
Not as far as I can see.
It's a populist police state. Chris, isn't hocking off our assets to fund $400 million worth of irrigation in the South Island for the dairy industry outrageous pork barrelling? Why do we need to sell our energy companies to fund the bloody dairy industry? Can't those greedy farmers pay for their own irrigation infrastructure?
If the state's willing to pay it for them.
Martin, they'll take the $400 million?
Why on earth would they pay it themselves? Look, the National Party is fundamentally the representative of farmers and businessmen and women. And in a geographical sense, it is very, very strong in what we like to call the heartland in provincial and rural New Zealand. To the victor go the spoils.
It didn't used to, until very recently though, Labour did have some provincial seats. It's won seats in the Hawke's Bay, it's won them in the South Island.
But then again, Matthew, once upon a time in provincial cities there used to be industries.
Well, there's now,
there used to be factories and workers that voted Labour.
Now it's even going to lose. It's looking like Palmerston North.
Yes.
And Labour is going to be without any provincial representation
purely
at all.
Purely urban.
And very little in Auckland. So it's going to be South Auckland. West Auckland is marginal. So who knows what will happen there. It's going to be very important tomorrow night. But then it's really just bureaucrats in Wellington and Christchurch and a few university lecturers in Dunedin. That's all Labour's left.
I was quite staggered at the rally on last Sunday, because what I saw was a Labour Party right down to its bedrock.
Right.
There were 700 to 800 people present. Maybe 350 of those were Pākehā. All the rest were Maori and Pacifica, or immigrants from India mostly. This is Labour right down to its core. In the past, half that audience would have been well-off, well-educated, middle-class people of conscience. Well, they're all with the Greens now.
Matthew, John Key likes being liked. We all know the global economy will deteriorate. Can he make the hard calls his backers on the right want him to make?
I think that there's not going to be very much change whatsoever if the government is re-elected. I think it will roughly implement its manifesto.
Yep.
And, as Chris was saying, you can't. We've criticised the governments of the 80s and 90s for either not issuing manifestos or issuing manifestos, then ripping them up after the election. We can't very much criticise John Key for his approach of saying, here's my manifesto, and he does his manifesto, and not really anything else.
So he's not going to tinker with working for families? That's always an area
No,
you've said he should cut down on?
I think working for, there will be. It'll be cut by 1%. So they'll cut the income cap from, it was cut from 164,000, they've cut it to 161. They might be brave enough to cut it to 159.
Yep.
But nothing substantial. The ACC issue, it'll only be one account.
As long as the international situation remains reasonably buoyant from the Australian-New Zealand perspective.
Yep.
We will go on politically the way we have been going.
Yep.
I mean, New Zealanders have had perhaps not a dream run, but certainly a much less anxious and a much less painful run than many of the populations of Europe, certainly the population of the United States.
Do you think with Treasury's black swans are circling and coming home to roost, that comfortable ride
but
might be over?
the point to make here is this: if it all goes awfully bad post-election, it matters not one whit which party is in power. Because
but also you've got to say
they would have to tighten our belts regardless.
Matt, do you think, and just quickly, if you look at, and you can be honest because you're an honest man, if you look at the welfare reforms, they're very, very...
1% of beneficiaries are affected, and there's a bit of a rebranding exercise.
Exactly. It's not a hell of a lot. And if you look at within the National Party, there is a lot of people who don't like the asset sales itself. Do you think a National Party could put all of that to one side to cut a deal with the Greens?
Well, potentially if they have to. In the end, the so-called asset sales that you make such a fuss over account to 3% or less of the government's total asset portfolio. It's 49% of these companies. If necessary, 3%, isn't it terrible? And in fact, over the same period of time as this so-called privatisation, the portfolio of the government's total commercial assets goes up from 58 to 72 billion even after these shares are sold. So I don't see in net terms where this privatisation is. So I think National, if it was necessary to stay in power, would dump it because 3% one way or the other of the total asset portfolio doesn't make such a difference.
Green blue could possibly be the Holyoke, couldn't it? That could be 3 terms.
Oh look, if there's some way that Russell Norman and Materia Ture can persuade the rank and file of the Green Party to throw in their lot with National, and if there's some way that John Key can persuade his caucus colleagues to forego that 3%, for example, then yes, you have a marriage made in heaven.
So you've got all, the left has got all upset about these two issues, welfare reform and asset sales. Well, one is 1% of beneficiaries, and the other is 3% of the.
And those are things National could dump, right?
So National can easily dump them and would dump them. And then what do the Greens do? Because they've said these two things, social justice and sovereignty, economic sovereignty, are the core of their campaign. If Key says, okay, we'll ditch them, what
Matthew,
do they do?
if the Greens could negotiate a moratorium on the partial privatisation of assets, they'd go into an agreement with National.
Well, we'll see what happens.
Question of both of you. If the right win, let's say it happens, who will we see in Cabinet? Who are we going to see in Cabinet?
Well, Matthew is better placed to answer that question than I am. I'm sure John Key will be looking at some of the young bloods in the backbenches.
Simon Bridges has to be given
Well,
something,
Simon, I think, believes he deserves promotion. Is it Nikki Kay? Is she one of the front runners?
I think the people that you would look at, the first thing is there have been some people who have retired, Wayne Matt and Power, so there's some vacancies. I think you can expect the Education Minister, Anne Tolley, to retire from at least that portfolio.
Yes.
And so I think there will be some change.
Will Joyce get spanked over his Rena fiasco and the way he handled the
No, he's the most powerful man in the government. The people you'd look at...
You've just engineered
a
record win.
I
don't think anybody's going
the Gen X people, the Gen X ministers, and it's going to be the first group after the post-baby boomer era. I think you look at it from the South Island, Amy Adams and Michael Woodhouse, although Michael Woodhouse had that problem with the police over the authorisation of some of his brochures, which will be noted, you know, because it's not safe.
Yep.
And then the other people you'd look at are Simon Bridges from the North Island, Tauranga, Sam Loader-Winger, who's going to triumph again in his seat. There's no chance of the union hack that Labor's put up beating him, and potentially Nikki Kaye, because while a lot of people were upset with the stand she took against mining, like Jerry Brown, he was absolutely furious, and John Key wasn't terribly impressed. In the end, John Key kind of admires that because he knows that'll probably win her seat.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3 tonight. So what happens if the left wing, consisting of Labour plus Greens plus New Zealand First plus the Mana Party, win? Matthew, according to far-right propagandist David Farrar, Western civilization as we know it will come to an end if a Labour Green minority government are dependent on New Zealand First and Mana. How fast will society deteriorate into hunter-gatherer, warlord communities if the left win?
Almost instantly.
Instantly?
But you know, I think that the only government that can be formed is that Labour Green New Zealand First.
Minority.
Interesting enough, New Zealand First now has more of a chance, I guess, of getting over that 5% threshold. It's received the endorsement of the White Resistance Movement and the National Front. So, you know, it could get there with that endorsement, very valuable endorsement to that particular party. And then there would be Mana as well. And Phil Goff can say that he wouldn't go into coalition with Hone Harawira, but, you know, he'd accept his votes and confidence and supply.
Sure.
So it's possible.
Within a matter of minutes, hunter-gatherer civilization.
The thing about that government is the Labour Party would actually be quite small. It would be about 60% of it, whereas
you'd finally get some real progressive
we have
policy
in the past, even with National New Zealand First and Labour Alliance, it's been about 80-20.
Right.
So this would be a change.
It'd be great.
I think that one of the things that's interesting, we were talking about the economy earlier, and you know, you are concerned about what you call the black swans.
No, yes.
But in fact,
Bill English called the black swans.
Well, if you look at the current bond rates, they are, for the first time in New Zealand's history, under 4%. They are as low as the safe havens of the world. And so, in some ways, you've got to say, as an economic strategy, we are being seen as a safe haven by the rest of the world. So I think the first thing that would happen is they would start to go up again, which wouldn't lead instantly to hunter-gatherer society, but it would certainly make all sorts of business expansion or borrowing far more difficult. And it would make the government's borrowing more expensive.
Matthew's understating.
There'd be 65 billion in extra spending that have to borrow.
Matthew is understating the shock and horror that would ensue if, by some miracle, the left were to cobble together some sort of coalition. There would be capital flight from this country on a massive scale. The news media would stand on its hind legs and it would scream foul. And quite frankly, I can't see how it works, because if Winston's to remain in opposition, then presumably the most that he can offer anybody is his abstention. And if National has the worst possible day, it will still end up with more seats under its command if Winston abstains than Labour has under its command.
But Winston's, I mean, you know, whatever Winston, how do you know Winston's lying? Check his pulse. I mean, the fact he's...
we know your particular animus against Mr. Peters. But let me just go on.
The fact he says he's going to abstain means nothing.
There is another problem, and that is both Phil Goff's attitude towards Mana and Mana itself. Now, Mana is a genuinely radical group with an almost schizophrenic attitude towards electoral politics. I mean, it doesn't believe in it, but it will be there. Whether it is actually capable of offering Phil Goff very much at all is a moot point, it seems to me. I'm not sure whether they would have a very clear position on what they would do. Perhaps, you know, going out and fighting a new election might appeal. They're activists after all. I mean, the instability inherent in a Labour, Green, New Zealand First, Mana combination, even from a left-wing perspective, is a little daunting.
Sure, but the New Zealand Herald editorial team, if that occurred, would go on suicide watch, wouldn't it?
I mean, yes, it would be difficult. But if on election night, and after specials are counted, the Labour, Green, New Zealand First, Mana group had more seats, and add in the Maori Party to that, because if push came to shove and they really had the balance of power, their activist base would say you've got to go in with that group.
Tari will never go with Labour. Never.
But they will only be 3 or 4. The fact is, no matter how difficult things are, if that left group has more seats than National, ACT and United Future, the government will change.
If Dunn loses Ohio, ACT loses him, and National gain less than a majority, do the left have a serious chance?
If National goes even as low as, as high, but as 47, right? New Zealand First gets over 5. If Dunn loses Ohio, which is possible,
and
if ACT is gone, then I think there's a good chance the government will change tomorrow night.
Chris, it's going to be fought at the fringes, isn't it?
I mean, it's if, but...
There are an awful lot of us there, Matthew. I would actually put National's danger zone considerably lower than 47.
Right.
I would say 44, 45.
Yep.
They're looking at a serious situation. But then again, Winston has to get over 5%.
Yep.
He may fall just short, which leaves Phil incapable of forming any kind of...
Oh, no, that's right.
I mean,
without
Winston, John Key is absolutely safe. I've said it, for months.
Yep.
If Winston Peters walks back into Parliament, John Key leaves to be home.
And I know that you disagree with my views on Winston Peters, but it is a fact that whatever he says before an election about his coalition negotiation intentions, he has always done the opposite.
Well, let's wait and see.
The opposite.
Let's round the show with the last word. Chris, your last word before the election is?
Well, I go into the next few hours with a pretty heavy heart, I have to say, because I think the chances of a left-wing victory are very slim indeed. I don't quite understand the New Zealand that I'm looking at currently. It will certainly be an electorate determined to rip up all the rule books and to prove the conventionally wise to be very foolish indeed. No New Zealand Prime Minister, no German Chancellor operating under the MMP system has ever won more than 50% of the vote or been able to form a government without coalition partners. If John Key is able to do that, then we are in new territory.
Yep.
And we will have to do a whole lot of redrawing of our political geography books and rewrite a whole lot of political rule books.
Sad day indeed. Matthew, you'll be popping the champagne corks? Your final word.
I think that the National will be re-elected. I think that ACT will be utterly impotent in that government no matter what. I think Peter Dunn might be part of it, and I think the Maori Party will be part of it, and I think the Greens will be memorandum of understanding. So I think we'll roughly have exactly the same government we've got now. And just as this government has been ultra-conservative with a small c, and has focused for the whole 3 years on winning the next election, and hasn't really done anything, hasn't tackled that working for families issue, hasn't tackled any of those important strategic issues, except has got these bond rates down, which actually is an important thing. I think in the second term, those on the right are going to be profoundly disappointed, and those on the left are going to be rather pleased, because I imagine there's going to be 3 more years of safely. The privatisation is not actually going to be such a big deal. The ACC thing will be one account, and that'll be about it.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Matthew. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word. Let us be grateful as we gear up to participate in our democracy that the transfer of political power can be handed over in our country without violence or intimidation. Whatever challenges we face as a country, we should be thankful that our liberal progressive democracy demands a civil society which in of itself benefits and enriches us all. Your participation in the democratic process, free of coercion on Saturday, is real freedom. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded new citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more